In his 1994 interview, Dr. Edward Edinger had the following to say about Dr. Carl Jung's relevance to religion, and by that he meant all the religions in the world. Let me play that section of his interview for you.
What does Jungian psychology have to do with religion?
Everything. Everything. You see, Jung has demonstrated that the religious function resides in the psyche and is an integral part of human psychology.
Okay, so today I'm going to read to you a chapter of a book that Dr. Edinger wrote, which gives a more thorough explanation of what Dr. Edinger is saying in this video. The book I'm reading from is The Bible and the Psyche, Individuation Symbolism in the Old Testament. I'm reading from chapter 1. The Bible and the Psyche. Quote, "We must read the Bible or we shall not understand psychology. Our psychology, whole lives, our language and imagery are built upon the Bible." C.G. Jung. This book was published by Inner City Books in 1986. As the 21st century approaches, we are witnessing the emergence of a whole new worldview growing out of depth psychology. This new science studies the psyche as an experienceable, objective phenomenon. It takes old data and approaches them in a new way. For instance, mythology, religion, and sacred scriptures of all kinds are taken out of their traditional contexts and understood psychologically. That is, are seen as the phenomenology of the objective psyche. From this view, the Bible is considered to be a self-revelation of the objective psyche. As Jung says, quote, "The statements made in the Holy Scriptures are also utterances of the soul. They point to realities that transcend consciousness. These entia are the archetypes of the collective unconscious. Heretofore, these transcendent psychic entities have appeared as metaphysical contents of religious dogma, but now," writes Jung, quote, "a scientific psychology must regard those transcendental intuitions that sprang from the human mind in all ages as projections, that is, as psychic contents that were extrapolated in metaphysical space and hypostasized." It is no easy transition from the metaphysical standpoint of religious faith to the empirical standpoint of the psyche. Between these two mountain ridges lies a dark valley, the valley of lost faith, alienation, meaninglessness, and despair. For those who are perched safely on the ridge of religious faith, the psychological approach can be seen as an interesting addition to the more secure viewpoint they already possess. However, for those who, consciously or unconsciously, have already slipped off the ridge of faith and are in the dark valley, the discovery of the psychological approach may just possibly be life-saving. This approach is an admission of spiritual bankruptcy. It is available only to the poor of spirit, for as Jung says, quote, "I am not addressing myself to the happy possessors of faith, but to those many people for whom the light has gone out. The mystery has faded, and God is dead. For most of them there is no going back, and one does not know either whether going back is the better way. To gain an understanding of religious matters, probably all that is left us today is the psychological approach. That is why I take these thought forms that have become historically fixed, try to melt them down again, and pour them into molds of immediate experience. The Old Testament documents a sustained dialogue between God and man as it is expressed in the sacred history of Israel. It presents us with an exceedingly rich compendium of images representing encounters with the numinosum. These are best understood psychologically as pictures of the encounter between the ego and the self, which is the major feature of individuation. The Old Testament is thus a grand treasury of individuation symbolism. These venerable stories derive from countless individual experiences of the numinosum, and their psychic substance has been augmented through the ages by the pious worship and reflection of millions. When these facts are realized, we discover once again that the Old Testament is indeed a holy book. It is quite literally the Ark of the Covenant in which resides the power and glory of the transpersonal psyche. We must therefore approach it with caution, honoring its numinous power. The psychological approach takes the Bible as it is, on the hypothesis that the collective psyche has semi-purposely selected and arranged it over the course of the centuries. While respecting the methods of biblical criticism, the psychological standpoint is not concerned that a particular passage of the Pentateuch comes from the J source rather than the E. Also, the sequence is considered significant. The Hebrew Bible, based on the Masoretic text 600 to 900 AD, consists of 24 books gathered into 3 parts: the Law, the Prophets, and the Writings. The arrangement of Old Testament books in the Christian Bible derives from the Greek translation made from 280 to 150 BC. This arrangement emphasizes a linear development process consistent with the historical, time-bound quality of the Western psyche. According to this version, the Old Testament is composed of 39 books, arranged sequentially in 3 categories: 17 historical books, 5 books of wisdom and poetry, and 17 prophetic books shown opposite. I see this arrangement as a balance. On one side are the historical books in which Yahweh deals with Israel collectively as a nation. At this stage, individuation imagery is carried by the nation as a whole, the chosen people. On the other side are the prophetic books, each one named after a great individual who had a personal encounter with Yahweh and was fated to be an individual carrier of God consciousness. In the middle are the poetic wisdom books, with Job at their head. Job is the pivot of the Old Testament story. That is why Jung focused his Bible commentary on Job. Here, for the first time, a man encounters Yahweh as an individual and not as a function of the collective. Similarly, Yahweh did not deal with Job as a representative of Israel, but rather as an individual man. This book thus marks the transition from collective psychology to individual psychology, from group and church religion to the individual's lonely encounter with the numinosum. After Job comes the wisdom literature, as though the individual's encounter with the self has generated wisdom, or, as Jung puts it in answer to Job, as though the demonstration of Job's greater consciousness has obliged Yahweh to remember his feminine counterpart, divine wisdom, Sophia. The events of the Bible, although presented as history, psychologically understood, are archetypal images, pleromatic events that repeatedly erupt into spatio-temporal manifestation and require an individual ego to live them out. As we read these stories with an openness to their unconscious reverberations, we recognize them to be relevant to our own most private experience. We are then reading the Bible the way Emerson tells us to read history. Quote, "The fact narrated must correspond to something in me to be credible or intelligible. We, as we read, must become Greeks, Romans, Turks, priest and king, martyr and executioner, must fasten these images to some reality in our secret experience, or we shall learn nothing rightly. What befell Asdrubal and Caesar Borgia is as much an illustration of the mind's powers and deprivations as what has befallen us. Each new law and political movement has a meaning for you. Stand before each of its tablets and say, quote, 'Under this mask did my Proteus nature hide itself,' unquote. This remedies the defect of our great nearness to ourselves. This throws our actions into perspective. And as crabs, goats, scorpions, the balance, and the water pot lose their meanness when hung as signs in the zodiac, so I can see my own vices without heat in the distant persons of Solomon, Alcibiades, and Catiline." Unquote. Jung tells us that the book of Job serves as a paradigm for a certain experience of God which has a special significance for us today. The same can be said of many other contents of the Old Testament. The new insights of depth psychology allow us to relate the mighty mythologems of the Bible to the depth experience of individuals. Christ reinterpreted the Old Testament as foreshadowing of his coming. For instance, speaking to the Emmaus pilgrims, quote, "Beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself." Luke 24:27, the authorized version of the King James Bible. So now at the beginning of a new eon, the individual pursuing the process of individuation may now read these scriptures once again to learn, quote, "those things concerning himself," unquote. Footnotes. The Emerson quote comes from History, the selected writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson, page 124. Most of the Jung quotes come from Psychology and Religion, Collected Works, Volume 11. See Rudolf Otto, The Ideas of the Holy, for a discussion of the concept of the numinous. Now I want to share with you a bit longer excerpt from the Edinger interview from 1994, and I will put a link to the transcript of it with this video. Also, at the end of this video, you will find a listing of the various books of the Old Testament as categorized by Dr. Edinger.
What does Jungian psychology have to do with religion?
Everything. Everything. You see, Jung has demonstrated that the religious function resides in the psyche and is an integral part of human psychology. And that just means that the the ego, in order to be healthy, needs to have a living connection to a transpersonal center. But the point is that the human psyche has a religious function in both senses, a need to link back and a need to give careful consideration to the source of his being. And the religious process then is one in which the ego has a living organic connection to a larger whole. And that, of course, is the function that the traditional religions have always served. They've done it by the collective structure and the dogmatic formulations and the whole concept of God and man's relation to God that they provide the believer. They've given the individual a religious container in which he has the sense of being connected to the larger whole. Now, modern man, especially the creative minority of modern man, has lost that connection provided by the traditional religions because they're too concrete. They haven't kept pace with the modern man's mental development. So they're not in tune with modern categories of understanding. So the great service that Jung has performed has, by his discovery of the collective unconscious and the archetypes and the self, he's penetrated to the psychological source and basis that underlies all the world religions, and thereby he's verified and redeemed for modern consciousness the validity and reality of the religious operations as they express themselves in all religions. That's been achieved, and I don't think we can appreciate the magnitude of that achievement, because what it means is that the psychological basis has been laid for the realization of a unified world. We've got the basis now for a unification of all the factional divisions among the world religions. It's been accomplished. One man has done it. I wish I could communicate the fact that I see so clearly concerning Jung's discovery of the basis of all the world's religions. He's achieved by this discovery the psychological basis for the unification of the world. It's really a pitiful sight to see the world split up into these separate warring fragments of religious identifications, of nationalistic identifications, of ethnic identifications, all at war with one another. They're all operating out of the energies of connection with the same transpersonal image of wholeness. They are all operating out of their connection to deity, to the self, as it is constellated and perceived within their local context, religious or nationalistic context. it's the same psychic self. And what Jung has done has penetrated to that source. That's the paradoxical God that he talks about. He's seen it, and once he's seen it, it can then no longer split up into these various ethnic and religious factions and fight against itself. One human being has seen the back of God, so to speak. So that means then that he's going to be eventually unified, and the world will be unified politically sooner or later as an inevitable consequence of that event of human consciousness.